476 AD, the palace in Ravenna. Picture this moment. A boy barely 16 years old lifts a heavy jewel-encrusted diadem from his head. His hands are trembling. His name is Romulus Augustulus. By a twist of fate, he bears the names of Rome's first king and its first emperor. But history had reserved a different role for him, the role of the last. Before him stands the Germanic warlord Odoacer. He does not kill the boy. He does not even keep these symbols of power for himself. He simply sends them east to Constantinople with a short message. We in the West no longer need an emperor. And so, without a grand final battle, without a fiery apocalypse, with a quiet sigh in a half-empty palace, the story of the greatest empire of the ancient world came to an end. A state that had dictated its will to nations and kings simply ceased to exist. But how was this possible? How did an empire that had ruled the world for over 1,000 years vanish into the darkness of the ages? Why couldn't a machine that seemed eternal survive? And most importantly, are we repeating today the very same mistakes that led to the fall of titans? To understand the scale of the fall, we must first look at the height from which Rome fell. Let's go back a few centuries. The 2nd century AD, the age of Emperor Trajan. This was the peak of Roman power. The Roman Empire was not just a country, it was an entire universe. Nearly 2 million square miles of perfectly organized space. From the misty hills of Britain to the scorching sands of Syria, from the dense forests of Germania to the banks of the Nile. Over 20% of the world's entire population lived under a single law and a single emperor. This was a civilization that had tamed nature itself. They built roads that still exist today. They constructed aqueducts that carried fresh water for dozens of kilometers, and cities with running fountains and central heating, while the rest of the world lived in straw huts. And guarding this paradise was the deadliest war machine of antiquity, the Roman legion. An army unmatched in discipline, tactics, and ruthlessness. If you were a Roman citizen, you could travel from Spain to Judea, paying with a single currency and speaking a single language. It seemed as though the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, would last forever. But poison had already been planted within this greatness. Rome's core problem lay in its greatest triumph, its size. The empire had simply become too big. Imagine governing a state the size of modern Europe in an era when the fastest means of communication was a horse. An order from the emperor in Rome could take weeks to reach the frontiers in Britain. And if a rebellion broke out there, by the time reinforcements arrived, the province could already be lost. In 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian understood a terrifying truth. One man could no longer govern this giant. He made a radical decision that would change history forever. He divided the empire. The world split into two parts. The Western Roman Empire, with its capital first at Mediolanum, Milan, and later at Ravenna. And the Eastern Empire, far wealthier and more stable, with its capital in a new city, Constantinople. At first, this seemed like a brilliant plan for salvation. But in reality, Diocletian did not save the West. He merely signed its deferred death warrant. The poorer West was left to face its problems alone. And its enemies sensed it. The end of the 4th century. The Great Migration of Peoples. It was a domino effect on a global scale. And it was set off by a people whose very name the Romans feared to speak. The Huns. These were nomads from the Asian steppes who seemed like demons to Europeans. Bound to their horses, armed with powerful composite bows, they left scorched earth in their wake. Fleeing this terror, other tribes living beyond the empire's borders rushed westward in panic. Straight to the gates of Rome, In 376, the Gothic tribes fleeing the Huns arrived at the Danube River and begged the Roman Emperor Valens to let them into imperial territory. Valens agreed, but what happened next became Rome's fatal mistake. Instead of assimilating the refugees, corrupt Roman officials began abusing them. They starved the Goths, sold them dog meat at exorbitant prices, and even forced them to hand over their children into slavery in exchange for food. Driven to absolute desperation, the Goths rebelled. 378 AD, the Battle of Adrianople. Emperor Valens decided to punish the insolent barbarians himself, but the Goths were enraged and fighting for their own survival. Their heavy cavalry suddenly struck the flank of the Roman legions. Rome's pride found itself trapped. In the crush, the legionaries could not even draw their swords. It was a massacre. The Roman army was annihilated, and the emperor himself, Valens, wounded, he took shelter in a farmhouse. The Goths simply set it on fire. The emperor burned alive. After Adrianople, the myth of Roman invincibility crumbled to ash. The wolves realized the lion was old and sick. A few decades pass and a new figure enters the stage. Alaric, leader of the Visigoths. The irony was that he was no savage from the forest. Alaric had served in the Roman army. He had fought for Rome, shed blood for it. But the empire betrayed him again and again, breaking agreements and refusing to give his people land to settle. Weary of Roman arrogance, Alaric gathered his army and marched to a place no one had dared approach in nearly 800 years. To the Eternal City itself, August 410 AD. Alaric besieges Rome. In a city that once numbered 1 million inhabitants, terror and famine reign. People eat stray dogs, rumors of cannibalism spread. And finally, at night, unknown figures, perhaps slaves, open the city gates. The Visigoths pour in. The Eternal City has fallen. 3 days of looting, burning palaces, and destroyed temples. The world was shocked. Saint Jerome, upon hearing the news, wrote that the lamp of the world had gone out, and that the city which had conquered the whole world had itself been conquered. But you know what's most terrifying? The reaction of the Western Emperor Honorius. He was holed up in the safety of Ravenna. When he was brought the news, Rome has perished, he panicked and cried out, "How could it have perished? It was just eating from my hands." The emperor thought his beloved chicken, which he had named Roma, had died. When it was explained to him that they meant the capital of the empire, he felt relieved. Such were the men who ruled the world in its final days. After 410, the floodgates broke. The Western Roman Empire began collapsing before everyone's eyes like a house of cards. Britain was abandoned. The legions simply sailed away, leaving the local population at the mercy of the Saxons. Across the frozen Rhine, the Franks, Burgundians, and Suebi poured into Gaul. But the fatal blow to Rome was not struck in Europe. It was struck in Africa. The Vandal tribe, led by the cunning and ruthless King Genseric, crossed Spain and landed in North Africa. In 439, they captured Carthage. Why was this a catastrophe? Because North Africa was Rome's breadbasket. From there came the grain that fed Italy. From there came the taxes that funded Rome's army. Having lost Africa, Rome lost both its money and its food. The empire went bankrupt. The Vandals then built a fleet, controlled the Mediterranean, and in 455 sacked Rome once more. So brutally that their name became a synonym for senseless destruction. Vandalism. The final 20 years of the Western Roman Empire were an agony. Rome no longer had an army of its own. All the soldiers defending the empire were themselves barbarian mercenaries. The emperors became mere figureheads. Real power lay in the hands of Germanic generals such as Ricimer. They placed emperors on the throne and killed them the moment they stopped obeying. And so we return to where we began. 476 AD, Romulus Augustulus's father, Orestes, refused to give the barbarian mercenaries land in Italy. In response, the warlord Odoacer simply rose in revolt, killed Orestes, and deposed his son. There were no epic speeches, no final stoic stand. Odoacer looked at the remnants of the empire and understood that pretending no longer made sense. Roman authority had become so weak that it wasn't even worth seizing. It was simply abolished. It seems as though the barbarians killed Rome. But the truth is far more painful. Rome committed suicide. The barbarians merely pushed open a door that had long since rotted from within. Why did the empire lose its immunity? The economy. For decades, the Roman state spent more than it earned. To pay its army, emperors kept reducing the amount of silver in their coins. This caused hyperinflation. Money turned into garbage, slavery. The Roman economy rested on the free labor of millions of slaves. When the empire stopped conquering new lands, the flow of new slaves dried up. And why would Romans invent new technologies or develop manufacturing when there were always people to do the dirty work for free? The economy simply stagnated. Degradation of the army. Roman citizens no longer wanted to fight. They avoided conscription, even cutting off their own fingers to avoid holding a sword. The army had to be filled with barbarian mercenaries who felt no loyalty to Rome, only to gold. Political chaos. In just 50 years during the 3rd century, more than 20 emperors sat on the throne, and nearly all of them were killed by their own soldiers. Constant civil wars drained the state more than external enemies ever could. Corruption ate away at every level of power. And finally, a shift in worldview. Some historians believe that a new religion, Christianity, changed the focus of society. Instead of serving the empire and pursuing earthly glory as their ancestors had, people began to think about the salvation of the soul and life after death. Rome was doomed not by anyone's strength, but by its own weakness. But did Rome really die in 476? Technically, yes. The Western Empire fell. But the eastern half, Byzantium, would survive for nearly another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law and traditions until 1453. And in the West, even in ruins, Rome lived on. Upon the ashes of the empire, the barbarians began building their own kingdoms. The very ones we today call France, Spain, Italy, Britain. Latin did not die. It transformed into the modern Romance languages. Roman law still underlies the legal systems of most countries in Europe and the world. And the Catholic Church adopted the structure of Roman administration. Rome did not vanish. It simply changed form. The story of Rome's fall is not merely a tale of men in togas and barbarians with axes. It is a mirror, the greatest warning in human history. They had the finest infrastructure, an invincible army, a brilliant culture. They believed their civilization was eternal, their dominance unshakable. But greed, corruption, internal discord, and the neglect of real problems brought this colossus crashing down under its own weight. Rome fell, but its legacy endures forever. Today, looking at our mighty states, global economies, and modern technologies, we must remember one thing. No empire is eternal. And when the foundations of society crumble, neither the highest walls nor the most advanced weapons can save it. If you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories ahead about great empires and the lessons they left behind. Leave your suggestions in the comments for topics you'd like to see in future videos. Which civilizations, battles, or historical figures you'd like to learn about. See you next time.